Welcome to the Writer Reads Short Stories. This one is Serpent Souls and Dragon's Hearts. Deep beneath the halls of a distant monastery, a chamber slowly came alive. Low murmurs filled the air with tremors, but none of those arriving raised their voices, although they wondered why they had been called. This time, their sleep had been longer than any sleep before. Each went to their place and waited, some quietly greeting neighbors they had not seen since before they went into stasis. Each grew silent as the podium was occupied by one of the elders. "I am Eshkaleth," he began, "but my name is not as important as what I have to say. As you are aware, in many cultures and on many worlds, the serpent is cast as an evil individual who habitually deceives. These tales are part of the struggle for power that's gone on for centuries, millennia, in fact. Even the term serpent has been applied unevenly, with the four-legged dragon coming under its banner. Is it any wonder, then, that when mankind met the lizardine, he greeted them with suspicion and hostility? Or was that only because mankind viewed Aqua Pearl through the biased eyes of greed? It was a verdant world, with the purest of seas, a pristine, apparently uninhabited planet, and humanity saw its wealth and arrived to plunder. And what happened when he realized it was already home to sentient life? Well, that was when the war began, and mankind's fall was inscribed in stone. Serpents, indeed! The lizardine were never serpents. They'd always had four limbs, and their hearts had always been those of dragons. When mankind went to war, they thought they fought a primitive species, one step above the ancient cave folk who once roamed Earth. And they couldn't have been more wrong. The lizardine had long ago made and corrected the environmental mistakes of man, and long ago perfected the nanite technology they used to bring their enemies low. Mankind has been annexed, tethered with a nanite yoke to the plough of reparation, and the lizardine have returned to the stars. Eshkaleth paused for effect and looked out at his audience. The faces turned toward him looked back, reptilian stares unblinking as each audience member waited for him to continue. "And now," Eshkleth said, "mankind has woken the Jelinar and drawn them from their lunar sanctuary. Bid them join his confederation of planets." Annoyance echoed in outraged sibilance. It was edged with alarm, but Eshkaleth continued. "What he does not know is that the Arak are stirring." And here the sibilance rose to a deafening cacophony, so loud he might have been standing within one of the sandstorms that scoured the world outside. Eshkaleth waited, listening as the protest died. His last words rang across the audience like the tolling of a bell. "It is time for the Serpent Brotherhood to stalk the galaxies again." And days later, on far-off Aqua Pearl, a little girl woke screaming. She was still waking as she ran to her mother, her wail of terror bringing the household from sleep. Her mother met her in the corridor of their home, scooping her from the ground and curling her close to her chest. "Amalea," her mother whispered. "Amalea, speak to me. Tell me what you saw." Felicity held her daughter tight, glad when Mika joined them and folding them both against his chest. She was not surprised when she felt someone else come to stand beside them and saw a human hand come to rest on her daughter's head. Manx, always at her back, always beside her. Well, always, except when he was looking out for her children. Felicity was very glad he had consented to accompany her from Earth. She was also surprised when Amalea pressed her head against his palm before turning to look at her with solemn eyes. "The serpents are awake," she whispered. "They are hunting." Her breath hitched, and she hiccuped. "They are hunting across the stars." "Who are they hunting, honey?" Felicity was aware of the sudden stillness in her husband's arms, of the way he seemed to hold his breath. Amalea bit her lip, her eyes growing dark with distress. Felicity waited, not letting her grip loosen around the child, aware of other members of their household joining them, as Amalea looked from her face to Micah's. The many-legged, the many-legged ones, she said, her voice barely louder than a breath. But it carried, and Felicity heard a chorus of gasps around them. She looked over at Micah and saw the briefest flicker of alarm cross his face before he smoothed his features. When he spoke, his voice was gentle, but Felicity heard the slightest quiver in its depths. "What else did you see, Ammy?" The girl twisted in Felicity's lap and reached out to her father. Felicity let her go and watched as Ammy wound her arms around Micah's neck, sliding into his lap. "Shadows," she whispered. "Little shadows at the edge of the room, hiding behind planets as they spin their webs." She stopped, looking up at him, her arms tightening as she pulled herself close to his chest. "What else?" Micah asked, and Amalea looked like a shrobat caught in a searchlight. "What?" Micah asked, his voice firm but carefully gentle. "They were eating each other like a storm. There was so much blood. I saw it spreading across the stars." Felicity looked from her daughter to her mate, watched as Micah pulled the child close and rested his chin on top of her head. The look on his face was somber. Slowly he gathered Amalea and stood. Then he carried the child to their bed and tucked her into the space where Felicity had been sleeping. "Close your eyes, Ammy," he said, and then turned and noticed the other children who had followed them into the room. With a sigh, he twitched back the covers. "Okay, get in," he told them, and Amalea's siblings scrambled in beside her. Felicity helped Micah tuck them in and activated the lamps on the bedside tables. "Go to sleep," she said, "or I'll send you all back to your rooms." She watched them settle down, then followed Micah out into the hall. Manx and the senior household staff were waiting for them when they emerged. No one said anything, however, until they reached the dining room. "Well," Manx asked, looking at Felicity and Micah, "what does it mean?" He wasn't going to question if Amalea had just had a nightmare. He'd been the first one to notice she was psi. None of them had worked out quite what kind of psi, but it seemed to bounce between some sort of farsight and a little premonition. What they had to work out now was what the child's latest incident meant, and that meant Micah had to tell them what it was they didn't know, because it was something. Felicity knew that from the way he'd reacted to the mention of serpents and the many-legged ones. And she knew it was something from the lizardine past because the other lizardine had responded also, but neither she nor Manx had a single clue as to what was meant. "It's the Arak," Micah said, as soon as they were seated around the table. "The many-legged ones and the serpentine have woken, a small civilized segment of the ones that remain. Both roamed the stars when we did, and both are part of the reason for our seclusion, and the seclusion of the Jalinar." "The Jalinar?" Mank asked. Felicity knew he'd heard of them, that he wasn't asking what they were, so much as how they were involved. The Jelinar had not heard of the Lizardine when they emerged from their seclusion on the moon in the caverns of Johornak. The Lizardine, however, had recorded their disappearance in annals dating back hundreds of years. The Serpentine, well, there was something else the Lizardine had not deemed important enough to share with humanity when they became its keepers. Felicity felt her tail twitch and tried to control the annoyance that lifted her lizardine crest. Manx reached across and touched her shoulder, and Felicity watched her husband's eyes widen at her colleague's touch. She smiled. "Care to share?" she asked, and her tones challenged him to deny her. Micah glanced across at his chief of staff, and Keslek dipped his head. It was less permission than acquiescence. "The Arak came across the stars like a flood eons ago. We fought them, protected worlds where sentience could not defend itself. We tried to negotiate, but the Arak said they were destined to rule and that all other life forms were their cattle. We were an empire then, a conglomerate of species much as we are now. We fought the Arak to a standstill and reversed the tide." He glanced across at Keslek, and again the chief of staff dipped his head. With a sigh, Micah continued. "They hid in pockets, And that was when we discovered their people could change their shape to blend in with a host species. Much like us, I suspect, they'd adapted and evolved as they grew. He opened his jaw slightly in a lizardine smile. It is where your human legends of vampires come from. The Arak that hid on your world were photophobic and vulnerable to UV light. We came after them when we could, but it was hard to remain unseen. Dragons, Felicity said, and felt the urge to smile herself. You were seen as dragons. Yes, Mika's voice was somber. We were dragons, and the serpents played a similar role in different lands. Between us, we cleared your planet of the infestation before it was too late. We saved your world, but almost lost our own, and that was why we retreated. And why we are so skilled with Nantek, his chief of staff added, and Mika jerked his head around to stare. Keslek shrugged. They would have to be told sooner or later, he said, and it is not good to keep secrets from our mates. What about your allies? Manx asked, meaning himself and the human council he represented. Keslek lifted his lip in lizardine acknowledgement.